Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku woke the Omega Protocol. That subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sky above Jaka's city was no longer blue. It was a bruised, violet-heavy canvas of dust, smoke, and the atmospheric pressure of a power that should not exist. The air didn't smell like a city anymore. It smelled of pulverized concrete, ozone, and the copper tang of blood that had been aerosolized by the sheer force of the impacts. Izuku Midoriya stood amidst the ruin, his breathing ragged, a rattling sound deep in his chest that warned of ribs pushed to their breaking point. But pain was a distant signal, something to be filed away for later. Right now, adrenaline was the only thing keeping his heart pumping. Across the cratered landscape, Tamura Shigaraki floated. He didn't fly. He simply existed in defiance of gravity, suspended by the unseen currents of All for One. His hair, white as bone, whipped around a face that was tearing itself apart with a manic, horrifying grin. The surgical scars on his chest were weeping, but he didn't seem to care. He looked like a god who had just woken up and found the world wanting. Is that all? Shigaraki's voice wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration that rattled Izuku's teeth. I'm just getting started. The voices. They're finally quieting down. I can think. I can choose. Izuku gripped his forearm, feeling the gauntlet digging into his skin. Beside him, Bakugo was panting, sweat dripping from his chin, his eyes darting frantically, analyzing, searching for an opening that didn't exist. Endeavor was burning hot, too hot, his flames turning a dangerous white, but even the number one hero looked small against the monstrosity hovering before them. Deku, Bakugo rasped, not looking at him. Don't stop moving. If you stop, you die. If you die, we all lose. I know, Izuku whispered. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, thin and terrified. I know, Kaken. But deep down, the fear was curdling into something heavier. Despair. They were hitting Shigaraki with everything. 100% smashes. Hell Spider. Prominence burn. It was like throwing stones at a tsunami. The villain simply regenerated, his body morphing, adapting, evolving in real time. Eraserhead. Shigaraki's eyes snapped toward the ground, locking onto the one man keeping the apocalypse at bay. Shota Aizawa stood on a piece of elevated rubble, his hair floating in a halo of defiance, his eyes bloodshot and unblinking. He was the dam holding back the flood. As long as Aizawa looked at Shigaraki, the decay quirk, and the myriad of other nightmares AFO had stuffed into that body, were silenced. But Aizawa was human. He was bleeding. His leg was a ruin of crushed meat and bone where a piece of debris had caught him earlier. Protect Eraser! Izuku screamed, the command ripping from his throat before he even processed the thought. The world shifted into slow motion. Shigaraki didn't move, he vanished. It was speed beyond the realm of muscle and tendon. It was the propulsion of quirks stacked upon quirks. Izuku's danger sense exploded in his skull, not a buzz, but a siren, a screaming white-hot needle piercing his brain. Death. 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 He kicked off the ground, one for all flooding his legs, the green lightning tearing up the concrete. He reached out, black whip unfurling like dark arteries from his skin, desperate to intercept, to pull his teacher away, to do something. But he was too slow. Shigaraki was already there. His hand, fingers splayed, reached for Aizawa's face. You're really cool, Eraserhead, Shigaraki whispered, his voice almost affectionate. But you're in the way. At the last microsecond, a wall of ice erupted. Todoroki. But Shigaraki shattered it with a casual backhand. In that split second of distraction, Aizawa did the unthinkable. He drew a knife and severed his own crushed leg to escape the debris pinning him, throwing himself backward. But the physical toll was too much. For a fraction of a second, less than the blink of an eye, Aizawa's focus wavered. His eyelids fluttered, the dam broke, the air pressure plummeted. A shockwave of pure malice exploded outward as Shigaraki's quirks came online all at once. The radio waves quirk shrieked, shattering the calms in everyone's ears. The rivets of red and black tendrils, the forceful activation quirk, erupted from Shigaraki's fingertips. They weren't aiming for Aizawa anymore. Shigaraki turned his head, his red eyes locking onto Izuku. "Little brother," he crooned. "Mine!" The tendrils shot out, faster than sound, faster than thought. They were jagged spears of hard light and biological matter, tipped with the promise of extraction. They were coming for one for all. Izuku tried to move. He tried to dodge. But his body was heavy, the air around him thick like syrup. The sheer, killing intent radiating from Shigaraki pinned him in place, a predator locking eyes with prey. He watched the black spears coming, and in that moment, Izuku Midoriya accepted his death. He saw the trajectory. It was going to pierce his chest. "I'm sorry, All Might," he thought. "I'm sorry, Mom." Then, a blast of heat. An explosion. "DKU, move!" A blur of orange and black collided with him, shoving him sideways with violent force. Izuku hit the ground hard, rolling, the concrete scraping his skin. He scrambled to look up, his eyes wide, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Katsuki Bakugo was suspended in the air where Izuku had been standing a moment ago. Time stopped. The silence was absolute. The roar of the battle, the screams of the heroes, the wind, it all vanished. Bakugo didn't look like he was in pain. He looked surprised. 3 thick, jagged tendrils had punched through his torso. One through the stomach. One through the shoulder. One dangerously close to the heart. The force of the impact had suspended him there, impaled like a butterfly on a pin. Blood didn't spurt, it sprayed. A fine mist of crimson painted the air, coating the black tendrils. "Casey-chan?" Izuku's voice was a broken squeak. Bakugo coughed, and a torrent of blood spilled over his chin, staining his teeth. He looked down at the spears in his body, then at Izuku. His eyes were hazy, losing focus. "Stop trying to win alone," Bakugo wheezed. Shigaraki frowned, twitching his fingers. The tendrils retracted violently. Bakugo's body went limp. He fell from the sky like a broken doll, hitting the concrete with a wet, sickening thud that echoed in the deepest chambers of Izuku's soul. "Useless," Shigaraki muttered, flicking Bakugo's blood off his quirk tendrils. "Wrong target. Just unnecessary waste." Izuku stared at the body. Something inside him snapped. In the original timeline, this was the moment rage took over. This was the moment grief transformed into a blinding fury that unleashed the uncontrollable power of Black Whip, turning Izuku into a wild beast. But not this time. This time, the trauma went deeper. This time, seeing the invincible Kaken, the symbol of victory, the person who had always been stronger, faster, better, lying broken in a pool of his own blood. It didn't make Izuku angry, it broke him. His mind couldn't process the image. It was an error. A fatal system error in his reality. Kaken can't die. If Kaken dies, then winning is impossible. If winning is impossible, then I have failed. If I have failed, I am nothing. Izuku didn't scream. He didn't cry out. He didn't unleash Black Whip. He just stopped. His eyes went wide and vacant. His jaw went slack. The green lightning surrounding his body flickered and died. He fell to his knees, not from exhaustion, but because he forgot how to stand. "Deku?" Todoroki shouted from somewhere far away. "Midoriya!" Izuku couldn't hear him. The world was turning gray. The edges of his vision were dissolving into static. He was retreating, pulling back from reality, diving deep into the only place that felt safe, the vestige world. The mental landscape of One for All was usually a place of abstract beauty, auroras of power, the smoky forms of the previous users standing in a circle of solidarity. Not today. Today, the vestige world was a hurricane. Izuku found himself standing on the precipice of the void, the dark smoke swirling violently around him. The ground beneath his feet, usually solid, was cracking. The sky of the inner world was screaming, flashing with jagged bolts of red lightning that mirrored the chaos outside. "I can't do it," Izuku thought. The thought echoed through the mindscape, amplified 1,000 times. "I can't save them. I can't save him. I'm not strong enough. I'm just Deku. I'm just a useless Deku." Ninth. The voice of Nana Shimura called out, faint and distorted by the wind. "Ninth, you have to stay with us. You have to wake up, Izuku." That was the first user, Yoichi. He sounded terrified. "Don't retreat. If you retreat now," Shigaraki will take you. Izuku ignored them. He curled into a ball on the mental floor, covering his ears. He wanted the pain to stop. He wanted the image of Bakugo's impaled body to disappear. He wanted to turn it off. I need to be stronger, he whimpered. I need to not feel this. Deep within the swirling smoke of the quirk's core, past the glowing lights of the previous users, there was a section of the vault that Izuku had never explored. It was dark, cold, and heavy. While the other users stood in the light, two figures usually remained in the shadows, facing the wall. The second and the third. Suddenly, the second user turned. He was a man scarred by a war that history had forgotten. He wore the heavy, militaristic gear of the resistance against Prime All for One. He had lived in a time where hero wasn't a job title. It was a death sentence. He had lived in a time where you didn't fight to save, you fought to exterminate, because the alternative was extinction. The second user walked through the storm, his boots echoing loudly on the mental pavement. He approached the curled-up form of Izuku. Boy, the second user said. His voice was like grinding stones. Izuku looked up, tears streaming down his face. I can't beat him. He's too strong. Kakin is. Everyone is going to die. Yes, the second user agreed. It wasn't cruel. It was a statement of fact. You are losing. You are losing because you are fighting a war with the mindset of a peacekeeper. You are trying to save a rabid dog. I have to save everyone, Izuku sobbed. That's what a hero does. That is what All Might did, the second user corrected. But All Might lived in the golden age that we built with blood. You are not in a golden age anymore, ninth. You are back in the dark ages. And in the dark, you don't need a hero. The second user pointed toward the deepest, darkest corner of the vault. There was a door there. It wasn't the golden door of One for All. It was a heavy, rusted bulkhead made of iron and spite. It was covered in chains, digital locks, and warning signs painted in archaic binary code. It hummed with a low, menacing frequency. What is that? Izuku whispered. A failsafe, the second user said. The third and I, we knew a day might come when the holder of this power was too gentle to do what was necessary. We knew All for One might create a monster that could not be saved, only destroyed. So we encoded a protocol into the core of the power. A protocol? It strips away the hesitation, the second user explained, stepping closer. It bypasses the limbic system. It suppresses fear, empathy, and pain. It utilizes the full processing power of all previous users to calculate the most efficient path to victory. It turns the vessel, it turns you, into a weapon. Don't do it, ninth! Yoichi's voice screamed from the other side of the storm. The first user was struggling against the wind, trying to reach them. That door was locked for a reason. It consumes the host. It's a suicide pact. It is the only way to kill Shigaraki, the second user said, ignoring his brother. He looked down at Izuku. Your friend is dying. Your teacher is crippled. The world is burning. Do you want to cry, or do you want to win? Izuku looked at the rusted door. He thought of Bakugo's blood. He thought of the terror in the eyes of the civilians. He thought of the crushing weight of expectation that he had never truly felt strong enough to carry. I don't want to feel this anymore, Izuku thought. I don't want to be scared. He stood up. The tears stopped. Open it, Izuku said. Ninth, no! Nana screamed. The second user nodded solemnly. He placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder. Forgive us. Izuku walked toward the rusted door. He placed his hand on the cold iron. System acknowledged. A voice spoke, not a human voice, but a synthesized amalgamation of the quirk's consciousness. Current host status. Critical psychological failure. Threat level. Extinction event. Authorization, User 2. User 3. User 9. The chains on the door shattered. The iron groaned and began to slide open. Inside, there was no light. Only a grid of neon green code cascading into an infinite abyss. Engaging failsafe. Protocol Omega. A blast of green light engulfed Izuku, swallowing his scream. Back in the real world, the battlefield was silent for a heartbeat. Shigaraki had paused, tilting his head. He sensed the shift before anyone else. The air around the boy, around Deku, had changed. The wild, chaotic crackle of One for All's lightning had vanished. Izuku was still on his knees, head bowed. Midoriya? Todoroki called out, icing a path toward him. Midoriya, we need to retreat. We need to get Bakugo to a medic. Izuku didn't answer. Slowly, mechanically, he stood up. His movement was wrong. It was too smooth. There was no wasted energy, no swaying, no trembling from exhaustion. He rose as if he were being pulled up by invisible wires. Deku? Shigaraki laughed, though the sound was unsure. Ready for round 2? Or are you going to break like your little friend? Izuku lifted his head. Gasps rippled through the heroes who were close enough to see. Izuku's eyes were gone. The large, expressive, tear-filled green eyes that defined Deku were replaced by twin pools of luminescent, harsh neon. There were no pupils. No irises. Just a flat, glowing green light that scanned the world with terrifying intensity. A faint HUD, heads-up display, effect seemed to flicker across the surface of his corneas. His face was completely slack. No anger. No determination. No fear. It was the face of a statue carved from ice. When he opened his mouth, the voice that came out was Izuku's, but it was overlaid with a harmonic distortion, a low, metallic buzz that sounded like two people speaking in perfect synchronization. Threat assessment initiated, the entity that was once Izuku Midoriya stated. Target: Tamura Shigaraki / All for One. Status: Hostile. Probability of victory with current parameters: 12%. Rerouting power from life support. Disabling pain receptors. Overclocking One for All to 100% constant. The air around him exploded. This wasn't a flickering full cowl. This was a solid, blinding aura of power. The ground beneath Izuku's feet instantly turned to powder, compressed by the sheer density of the energy radiating from him. His skin turned a shade darker, veins bulging and glowing green as the quirk forced his body beyond its natural limits. Shigaraki's grin faltered. What is this? Engage, the voice said. There was no wind-up. No smash cried out. 1 millisecond, the entity was standing there. The next, it occupied the space directly in front of Shigaraki. The sonic boom didn't happen until after the fists connected. It was a strike of mathematical perfection. It didn't hit Shigaraki's face or chest. It struck the solar plexus, precisely at the grouping of nerves designed to incapacitate. Shigaraki folded. His eyes bulged. He was launched backward, smashing through 3 skyscrapers before he could even register the impact. The entity didn't watch him fly. It didn't gloat. It turned immediately to the nearest threat, the Hyen Nomus that had begun to encroach on the battlefield. Midoriya! Endeavor shouted, landing nearby. What are you doing? We need to coordinate. The entity turned its glowing green gaze to the number 1 hero. Obstacle detected, the voice droned. Endeavor. Vital signs fluctuating. Combat efficiency compromised. Recommendation: retreat immediately. You are blocking the optimal firing solution. What? Endeavor blinked, taken aback by the coldness. I'm telling you, the entity ignored him. Black whip erupted from its back, but these weren't the wild, smoky ropes Suzuki usually used. These were rigid, thin, and razor-sharp. They moved with insect-like precision. 6 tendrils shot out, piercing the joints of a near Hyen Noma that was lurking behind a pile of rubble. The Noma shrieked. The entity clenched its fist. The tendrils retracted violently, dissecting the Noma into precise quarters. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was horrifying. Shigaraki roared in the distance, exploding out of the rubble. He was regenerating, but slower this time. He looked furious. You think a power-up changes anything? I am absolute. He launched a wave of decay across the ground, a tide of gray death rushing toward them. The heroes braced themselves. The entity, Omega Deku, did not brace. It calculated. Decay propagation speed, 40 meters per second. Soil composition, loose concrete. Countermeasure, aerial bombardment. The entity crouched. The pressure cracked the earth. It launched itself into the sky, soaring higher than any hero had any right to go. Suspended in the air, surrounded by the smoke of the war, Omega Deku raised a leg. One for All concentrated entirely into the limb, the muscle fibers tearing and instantly being held together by microscopic weaves of black whip to prevent total structural failure. Manchester smash. Modified. Area denial. He swung his leg down. He didn't hit a person, he kicked the air. The air pressure cannon that resulted was akin to a tactical nuke. A column of compressed air slammed into the ground, obliterating the decay wave, shattering the street, and creating a shockwave that knocked every hero and villain within a 2-mile radius off their feet. Dust billowed up, a thick gray curtain. In the center of the crater, the entity stood amidst the devastation. Its right leg was broken, purple, twisted, the bone clearly snapped. Endeavor, coughing and struggling to stand, looked on in horror. Midoriya! Your leg! The entity looked down at the broken limb. There was no wince. No gasp of pain, locomotion compromised, the voice stated flatly. Repairing. Black whip tendrils spiraled out of the skin of his leg. They wrapped around the broken bones, forcibly snapping them back into alignment with a sickening crack that echoed across the silent battlefield. The tendrils tightened, acting as an external splint and artificial muscle. The entity stomped the foot down, testing the repair. It held. Mobility restored at 85%, it said. It turned its gaze back to Shigaraki, who was pulling himself out of the debris, looking genuinely rattled for the first time. Who are you? Shigaraki hissed. You're not that brat. You're something else. The glowing green eyes narrowed. The dual-layered voice spoke, broadcasting over the silence of the ruined city. I am the solution. Inside the vestige world, enclosed in a glass box that had materialized around him, the real Izuku Midoriya banged his fists against the transparent walls. He watched on a massive screen as his body moved without him. He watched as he broke his own bones and didn't feel it. He watched the terror in Endeavor's eyes. Let me out! Izuku screamed, his voice hoarse. Stop it! You're hurting him. You're scaring them. The second user stood outside the box, arms crossed, watching the screen with grim satisfaction. We are not scaring them, Ninth, the second user said calmly. We are saving them. Rest now. The protocol has the wheel. No! Izuku slammed his shoulder against the glass. This isn't right. This isn't a hero. Correct, the second user said, turning his back on Izuku to watch the carnage unfold. It is a weapon. And it is winning. On the battlefield, Omega Deku lowered his stance. Danger sense flared. Gigantomachia was approaching from the south. Shigaraki was regenerating. The Nomas were regrouping. The entity processed the variables in a nanosecond. Multiple hostile signals detected. Probability of total allied casualty, 94%. Priority update. Preserve host Izuku Midoriya for future counteroffensive. The entity turned to the heroes. To Gran Torino lying in a pool of blood, to Bakugo's unmoving body, to the terrified face of Todoroki. Assets deemed non-essential for immediate victory, the entity stated. It turned away from them. Midoriya? Todoroki whispered, confused. Where are you going? We have to fight. Tactical retreat initiated, the entity said. Survival of one for all is the only directive. Without a backward glance, the entity kicked the ground, vanishing into the smoke at supersonic speed, leaving the heroes alone to face the apocalypse. DKU! Todoroki screamed. But the green ghost was already gone. And in the silence that followed, as Shigaraki began to laugh, the heroes realized that something far worse than a villain had just been born in the ruins of Jaka City. They had lost their symbol of hope, and they had woken up a monster. The silence that followed the transformation was heavier than the noise of the war. It was a vacuum, a void where the concept of hope had been violently excised, replaced by a cold, shivering dread that settled into the marrow of every living soul on the battlefield. The dust from the Manchester smash hung in the air like a funeral shroud, thick and gray, obscuring the sun. Shoto Todoroki stared. His left side was burning, his right side was freezing, but he felt none of it. He was numb. He was looking at the figure standing amidst the cratered ruin of the street, and his mind was refusing to categorize it. That was Midoriya. The green hair, the torn costume, the red shoes. It was him. And yet it wasn't. Human beings moved with a certain inefficiency. They swayed when they breathed. They adjusted their weight. They flinched at loud noises. They projected intent through body language. This figure did none of those things. It stood with absolute, geometric stillness. Its center of gravity was perfectly aligned. Its arms hung at optimal angles for rapid engagement. The eyes were the worst part. Shoto had seen Midoriya's eyes filled with tears, with fear, with determination, with kindness. He had never seen them like this. The sclera, iris, and pupil were gone, replaced by a singular, flat plane of neon green luminescence. They didn't blink. They didn't express. They merely scanned, sweeping across the battlefield like the lens of a targeting computer. Midoriya? Shoto's voice cracked. It felt absurd to whisper in the middle of a war zone, but he was afraid that if he spoke too loudly, the thing would look at him. The entity, Omega, did not respond to the name. It rotated its head 5 degrees to the right, locking onto the shifting rubble where Tamura Shigaraki was pulling himself free. Endeavor, Shoto said, looking at his father, who was clutching his side, blood leaking between his fingers. What is he doing? Why isn't he answering? Endeavor, the number 1 hero, the man who had spent his life chasing power, looked terrified. I don't know, he rasped, spitting a clot of blood onto the concrete. That isn't the power All Might used. It feels ancient. It feels like a weapon. Across the devastation, Shigaraki stood up. His regeneration was working overtime, steam rising from his body as muscle fibers knitted together, and skin sealed over raw meat. He looked at the green-eyed boy, his expression shifting from arrogance to genuine confusion. You! Shigaraki tilted his head, a manic grin trying to form but failing. You're not a player anymore, are you? You're a glitch. A broken NPC. Omega Deku did not taunt back. He did not scream about justice. He did not monologue. Inside the skull of Izuku Midoriya, the Omega Protocol ran a diagnostic. Subject, Tamura Shigaraki. Quirk factor, multiple. Hyperregeneration active. Decay active. Air cannon active. Radio waves active. Threat assessment, Omega level. Objective, neutralize. Constraint, host body durability at 42%. The voice that emerged from Omega's mouth was a digital rasp, a dual-tone frequency that grated on the ears. Analysis complete. Regeneration rate, 2.4 seconds for major tissue damage. Decay propagation, contact-based. Strategy, disassemble faster than reconstruction. Disassemble? Shigaraki laughed, raising a hand. I'll turn you to dust. Boom. There was no blur of movement. One moment, Omega was 20 meters away. The next, he was inside Shigaraki's guard. It wasn't a punch. It was a dismantling. Omega's right hand, wreathed in green lightning that didn't crackle but hummed with a steady, terrifying voltage, drove straight into Shigaraki's shoulder joint. The sound was sickening, the wet pop of a ball socket being obliterated. Shigaraki screamed, his arm going limp. He tried to swing his other hand, the one capable of decaying anything it touched. Omega didn't dodge. He calculated. Trajectory, left carpal. Intercept. Omega's left hand shot out, fingers stiffened into a blade-like formation. He struck Shigaraki's wrist, not to break it, but to sever the tendons controlling the fingers. The hand flopped uselessly, the fingers unable to close, unable to activate the quirk. Shigaraki stumbled back, eyes wide. You bastard! He unleashed a blast of air pressure from his chest, a point-blank cannon shot meant to blow Deku away. Omega saw the telegraphing, the expansion of the chest cavity, the glow of the quirk activating. A human hero would have blocked or dodged. Omega calculated that dodging would increase the distance between them, lowering the probability of a kill. So he took it. The blast slammed into Omega's chest. Ribs cracked. The sound was like stepping on dry twigs. But Omega didn't fly backward. Black whip exploded from his back, 6 tendrils, not flowing like smoke, but rigid as rebar. They stabbed into the concrete behind him, anchoring him to the ground. He leaned into the blast, his feet digging trenches in the rock, his body absorbing the kinetic force that should have pulped his organs. Damage sustained, thoracic fracture. Lung capacity reduced by 15%. Acceptable, the voice droned. Omega lunged through the blast, seizing Shigaraki by the throat. Midoriya, stop! Shoto screamed, instinctively stepping forward. "You're going to kill him!" Omega didn't hesitate. He slammed Shigaraki into the ground, the impact cratering the asphalt. He lifted a fist, glowing with 100% of one for all stockpiled power. He didn't aim for the face. He aimed for the brainstem, the vestige world. Izuku Midoriya was screaming. He was trapped in a box made of transparent, unbreakable data. The walls hummed with binary code, scrolling too fast to read. Outside, the storm of the quirk raged, but here, in the center, it was clinically cold. Before him hung a massive screen, a window into reality. He saw his own fist raised. He saw the terror in Shigaraki's eyes, not the terror of a villain caught, but the terror of a living thing realizing it is being fed to a grinder. "Stop!" Izuku pounded on the glass, his knuckles bruising. "Don't kill him. That's not what we do. We save people." The second user, Kudo, stood with his back to the screen, facing Izuku. His arms were crossed over his chest, his face hard and unyielding. "We are saving people," Kudo said calmly. "We are saving millions. By ending one. He's a victim too," Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face. "All for One made him this way. If we kill him, we're just doing what he wants. We're becoming murderers. War is murder." "Ninth," Kudo replied, his voice devoid of pity. "You have been playing hero. You have been wearing a costume and giving names to your attacks. But this is the reality of the power you hold. It was forged in blood. It was created to destroy the Demon King. You were too soft to pull the trigger. So the protocol is doing it for you." On the screen, Izuku watched his own fist descend. Shigaraki managed to twist at the last second. The punch missed the brainstem but obliterated the clavicle and smashed into the ground, sending a shockwave that tore the street in half. "Look at him!" Kudo pointed at the screen. "Look at the efficiency. No wasted movement. No hesitation. No fear. This is the perfect vessel. It's a machine!" Izuku yelled. "It's not me. I'm not a machine." "You are a component," Kudo said coldly. "You are the battery. The protocol is the guidance system. You wanted to save everyone, didn't you? Well, look at the data." Kudo waved a hand. A holographic chart appeared in the air next to Izuku's prison. Probability of AFO defeat. Before protocol, 0.04%. Current status, 28%. "The numbers don't lie, kid," the third user spoke up from the shadows, his voice rough. "We're winning. For the first time in 100 years, we have him on the ropes. I don't care about the numbers." Izuku slammed his forehead against the glass. "I care about my friends. Look at Kaken. Look at Mr. Aizawa. They're terrified of me." "They are alive," Kudo said. "That is what matters." Izuku slid down the glass wall, collapsing to his knees. He watched on the screen as his body, moving with jerky, terrifying speed, pursued Shigaraki through the rubble. He felt every impact, ghostly echoes of pain that the protocol was suppressing from his conscious mind. He felt his bones grinding together. He felt the muscles tearing. "Please," Izuku whispered. "Please let me out." "Not until the job is done," Kudo said, turning back to the screen. Protocol Omega is absolute. The real world. The battle had evolved from a fight into a hunt. Shigaraki was powerful. He possessed the strength of all might and the ultimate destruction of decay. But he was reeling. His mind, still merging with All for One, was fractured. He was fighting on instinct. Omega Deku was fighting on algorithm. Every time Shigaraki tried to regenerate, Omega targeted the wound, ripping it open again to force the body to waste energy. Every time Shigaraki tried to use a quirk, Omega identified the somatic component, a twitch of the finger, a shift in stance, and neutralized it before activation. It was a massacre of attrition. Shigaraki roared, a sound of pure frustration, and unleashed a chaotic wave of radio waves. The air shrieked. The ground exploded. Omega was thrown backward, tumbling through the air. He crashed into the side of a ruin, the remains of the hospital wing. A steel girder impaled his left thigh, pinning him to the wall. Shigaraki laughed breathlessly, blood coating his teeth. "Got you! You're just flesh and blood. You break like the rest of them." He charged, hand outstretched, 5 fingers ready to turn Omega to dust. Shoto and Endeavor moved to intercept, but they were too slow. Midoriya! Omega looked down at the girder through his thigh. Movement restricted. Evasive maneuvers impossible. Close quarters engagement inevitable. He didn't try to pull the girder out. That would take 3 seconds. He didn't have 3 seconds. He gripped the girder with both hands. Black whip, internal reinforcement. Black tendrils erupted from his palms, phasing into the metal, then into his own leg. He fused the foreign object to his own bone structure. Then, he tore himself through it. With a wet, tearing sound that made Endeavor gag, Omega ripped his body forward, the girder slicing through the muscle but failing to stop him. He dropped to the ground, blood gushing from the gaping wound. Hemorrhage detected. Cauterization required. Omega didn't pause. He grabbed a live electrical cable dangling from the ruin, a severed power line sparking with thousands of volts. He jammed the live wire directly into the open wound in his thigh. The smell of cooking meat filled the air. Smoke rose from his leg. The bleeding stopped instantly. Shoto froze, his hand covering his mouth. He just... Omega didn't scream. He didn't even grimace. His heart rate monitor on the internal HUD didn't spike. It remained a steady, flat line of focus. He stood up on the burnt, mangled leg. Repairs complete. Resuming offensive. Shigaraki skidded to a halt, staring at the boy. For the first time since he had awakened, this symbol of fear felt afraid. You're insane, Shigaraki whispered. You're not a hero. You're a monster. Definition irrelevant, Omega stated. Result is priority. Omega blurred forward. Shigaraki panicked, throwing up a wall of air cannon blasts. Omega weaved through them, using the debris as shields, calculating the trajectory of every blast. He closed the distance. He grabbed Shigaraki's face. Smash! He slammed Shigaraki's head into the pavement, dragging him through the concrete like a plow. He threw him upward, then leaped, catching him in the air. He spun, centrifugal force building, black whip wrapping around Shigaraki to bind his arms. Full 100%. Wyoming smash. He spiked Shigaraki into the earth. The impact was cataclysmic. The shockwave shattered the windows of buildings 3 miles away. A mushroom cloud of dust rose into the sky. The heroes shielded their eyes. As the dust settled, they saw a crater. In the center, Shigaraki lay broken. His body was twisted, his regeneration failing to keep up with the massive trauma. He was gurgling, trying to breathe through a crushed chest. Omega stood over him. He raised a foot, positioning it directly over Shigaraki's throat. Finishing blow prepared. Wait! The scream came from Gran Torino. The old hero, battered and barely conscious, was being supported by Manuel. Kid! Don't do it! Gran Torino yelled, blood bubbling from his lips. If you kill him like this, if you execute him, you can't come back from that. You're a hero, Toshi's successor. Omega paused. The green eyes rotated to Gran Torino. User, Gran Torino. Status, critical. Opinion, irrelevant to objective. Midoriya! Shoto shouted, running toward the crater. Stop! Look at us! It's me! It's Todoroki! Omega looked at Shoto. The HUD flared. Ally, Shoto Todoroki. Proximity, 15 meters. Threat minimal. Action ignore. Omega turned back to Shigaraki. He lifted his foot higher. The one for all lightning turned a jagged, angry black-green. But just as he prepared to stomp, the ground shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a rhythmic, thunderous pounding that grew louder with every second. Tum. 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 The debris on the ground began to dance. Omega's head snapped to the horizon. The sensors in his eyes zoomed in, bypassing the smoke. 10 miles away. Moving at 100 kilometers per hour. A mountain was moving, Gigantomachia, and on his back, the League of Villains. Dabi. Toga. Spinner. Mr. Compress. Omega's internal processor began to whir. New threat, Gigantomachia. Class, catastrophe level. Backup League of Villains high tier. Current host condition, left leg compromised. Ribs fractured. Energy reserves at 60%. Ally status, 90% incapacitated. The numbers cascaded down Izuku's vision in the mindscape. Probability of victory versus Shigaraki Gigantomachia. Calculating. 0%. The second user cursed. Damn it. The beast is here. Omega lowered his foot. Shigaraki, sensing the reprieve, wheezed a laugh. Master is here. Omega stepped back. He looked at Shigaraki, then at the approaching dust cloud of Gigantomachia, then at the heroes. Endeavor limped forward. Midoriya! We have to finish him now. Before the giant gets here. Omega turned to Endeavor. Negative, the voice said. Probability of success has dropped below acceptable threshold. Continuation of combat will result in total asset loss. Host destruction is certain. What? Endeavor stared. You're running? You have him pinned. Correction. I have him delayed. The arrival of threat Gigantomachia creates a scenario of inevitable defeat. Logic dictates preservation of one for all. You can't just leave. Uraraka's voice rang out. She had just arrived on the scene, supported by Tsuyu. Her face was pale, eyes wide with horror at the state of Deku. Deka! We're all here. We fight together. Omega looked at Uraraka. Asset Ochako Uraraka. Status exhausted. Combat utility low. Presence of low-level allies reduces combat efficiency, Omega stated, his voice amplified so everyone could hear. Defense of allies requires 40% of processing power. You are liabilities. Uraraka flinched as if she'd been slapped. Liabilities. Deku, snap out of it. Bakugo's voice was weak. He was lying on a stretcher that Rocklock had conjured, barely conscious. Don't you dare, run away, nerd. Omega paused. The green eyes flickered. For a millisecond, the pupil returned. Inside the box, Izuku screamed. Kaken! I'm here! I'm not running! But the protocol clamped down. The pupil vanished. The neon green returned, colder than before. Host emotional response suppressed, the voice said. Omega turned his back on them. Where are you going? Shoto demanded, stepping in his path. Ice formed on his right side, a desperate attempt to stop him. Omega didn't attack Shoto. He simply moved around him. Faster than Shoto could track. Acquiring resources. Isolating variable. Preparing for guerrilla warfare. Midoriya! All Might's voice came over the comms, crackling through a surviving earpiece on the ground. Young Midoriya! Answer me! Omega looked at the earpiece lying in the dirt. He crushed it under his heel. The carrier must survive, Omega said. He crouched low. The energy gathered in his legs, cracking the bedrock. DKU! Uraraka screamed, reaching out. Boom! He was gone. A shockwave of green lightning tore through the street as he launched himself into the sky, flying away from the battle, away from the villains, and away from the friends he had sworn to protect. He didn't look back. Machines don't have regrets. The heroes were left in the silence, staring at the empty sky. Shigaraki, coughing up blood, began to laugh. It was a wet, gurgling sound. He left you. The hero left you to die. Gigantomachia crested the hill, his roar shaking the heavens. Shoto fell to his knees. He looked at his hands, then at the sky where his friend had vanished. He didn't leave, Shoto whispered, a chill settling in his heart that had nothing to do with his quirk. He was taken. High above the clouds, Omega Deku flew north. His face was a mask of indifference, but deep inside, trapped behind the wall of code and the iron will of the second user, a 14-year-old boy was curling into a ball, weeping into the darkness, while his body carried him further and further into the abyss. Current objective, survival. Compassion, disabled. The Omega Protocol is active. The rain in Tokyo didn't wash the city clean. It just made the grime slicker. 3 days had passed since the collapse of Jaka City. 3 days since the Paranormal Liberation Front had shattered the bedrock of Japanese society. 3 days since the symbol of peace, or the boy who was meant to carry that torch, had vanished into the gray sky, leaving behind a legacy of broken bones and a silence louder than any scream. The city of Mizudafu, usually a bustling hub of quark-assisted commerce, was a ghost town. Martial law had been declared, but there was no one to enforce it. The heroes were dead, hospitalized, or spread so thin they were invisible. In the shadows of an alleyway in the Camino ward, a group of looters smashed the window of an electronics store. "Hurry up!" one of them hissed, a man with shark-like gills on his neck. "Before the cops show up." "There are no cops, idiot," his companion laughed, hefting a flat-screen TV. He had rocky protrusions covering his arms. "The heroes are gone. Endeavor is down. Hawks is missing. It's our time now." They laughed, a jagged, nervous sound. They felt like kings of the ashes. They were wrong. From the darkness above, something dripped. It wasn't rain. It was too heavy, too viscous. A drop landed on the shark man's cheek. He wiped it away, frowning at the smear on his fingers. It was black mud, smelling of old ozone and swamp water. "What the?" He looked up. Perched on a fire escape 4 stories up was a silhouette. It didn't look human. It looked like a gargoyle carved from shadow and green neon. There was no heroic landing. There was no dramatic speech. The figure simply stepped off the ledge. Gravity seemed to have a personal vendetta against the figure, pulling it down with unnatural acceleration. It landed silently, an impossibility given the velocity. The asphalt didn't crack. The impact was absorbed, redistributed instantly through the body. The looters froze. "Who the hell are you?" the rock-armed villain shouted, trying to summon bravado. "Get lost. This is our turf." The figure straightened. It was the boy from the news. The one they were calling the traitor. The rogue. But the boy usually wore a smile. This thing wore a mask of indifference. The cowl was torn, revealing messy green hair matted with rain and dried blood. The costume was shredded, held together by black tendrils that wove through the fabric like living stitches. And the eyes. They were 2 flat screens of viridian light, illuminating the rain that fell between them. "Civilian threat level, minimal," a voice spoke. It sounded like 2 sheets of metal sliding against each other. "Criminal activity detected, looting. Violation of Civil Code 238. Judgment, suppression." "Suppression?" the rock-armed villain sneered. "I'll suppress you." He lunged, swinging a fist made of granite. The green-eyed entity didn't dodge. It simply ceased to be where the fist landed. There was a crack, sharp and dry, like a gunshot. The rock-armed villain screamed. He was on the ground, looking at his arm. It was broken at the elbow, bent at a 90-degree angle in the wrong direction. The entity stood over him. It hadn't punched him. It had merely slapped the arm aside with calculated force, using the villain's own momentum to snap the joint. The shark man panicked. He pulled a knife. "Stay back. I'll cut you." The entity turned its head. The HUD in its eyes flared. "Weapon detected, Class 4 blade. Distance, 3 meters. Engagement time, 0.2 seconds. Black whip surged from the entity's back. But these weren't the wild, thrashing ropes of the past. They were thin, rigid needles. 2 of them shot forward, piercing the shark man's shoulders. He shrieked as he was lifted off the ground, pinned against the brick wall of the alley. The knives dropped from his numb fingers. The 3rd looter, a woman with stretching fingers, turned to run. She didn't get 3 steps. The entity appeared in front of her. It didn't use a quirk. It used pure raw speed. It grabbed her by the throat, not choking, just holding. "Interrogation initiated," the voice buzzed. "Location of Tamura Shigaraki. Location of All for One. Speak." I don't know." The woman sobbed, clawing at the iron grip. "Please. We're just stealing TVs. We don't know anything about the big guys." The green eyes narrowed. The grip tightened by exactly 5%. "Inefficient," the entity stated. "Heart rate indicates truthfulness. Value of subjects, null." He dropped her. She collapsed, gasping for air. The entity turned back to the shark man pinned to the wall. It walked closer, the sound of its iron-soled boots echoing in the alley. "You possess skills," the entity observed. "Aquatic social circles often overlap with smuggling routes used by the Detnerat Company. You will provide coordinates for safe houses near the harbor." "I don't know anything," the shark man cried. The entity reached out. A finger, glowing with 20% of One for All, hovered over the man's knee. "Pain is an effective data retrieval method," the entity said without malice. I will dismantle your skeletal structure from the extremities inward until data is provided. We will begin with the patella. No! No, wait! The warehouses. District 4. They move no cargo at night. That's all I know. Swear to God, the glowing finger retracted. The black whip tendrils withdrew instantly, dropping the man into the mud. Data acquired. Probability of accuracy, 78%. The entity turned and walked away. Wait! The woman whispered, trembling. Aren't you a hero? Aren't you supposed to arrest us? The entity paused. It didn't look back. Prisons are compromised. Police force is non-functional. Arrest is an inefficient allocation of time. You have been neutralized. Do not rise. With a burst of air pressure that shattered the remaining windows in the alley, the green ghost launched itself into the night sky, leaving 3 broken criminals in the rain, praying that the police would come before he returned. Internal system, the vestige world. Deep within the subconscious of the entity, there was no rain. There was only the static hiss of white noise and the oppressive glow of data streams. Izuku Midoriya sat in the corner of a glass box. The box was roughly 10 feet by 10 feet, suspended in the void of the one-for-all core. The walls were made of scrolling binary code, neon green text that moved so fast it blurred into solid barriers. Outside the box, the storm of the quirk raged. The vestiges of the past users were silhouettes in the mist, distant and unreachable. Inside the box, Izuku was hugging his knees, rocking back and forth. He was forced to watch. The front wall of the glass box was a massive screen, projecting the feed from his own eyes. He had just watched it, break a man's arm with the casual indifference of snapping a twig. He had felt the tactile sensation of the bone giving way. He had heard the man's scream echo in his own skull. Stop it! Izuku whispered. His voice was hoarse from 3 days of screaming. Please stop it. We could have just tied them up. We didn't have to break them. Tying them up requires materials we do not possess, a voice answered. The second user, Kudo, materialized outside the glass wall. He looked as he always did, stern, scarred, wearing the heavy flight jacket of a resistance fighter. He walked around the perimeter of Izuku's prison like a warden inspecting an inmate. Furthermore, Kudo continued, his voice echoing through the glass, leaving them operational increases the risk of them alerting higher-level threats. Incapacitation ensures silence. Silence ensures survival. Izuku scrambled to his feet, slamming his hands against the digital wall. Survival? Is that all this is? We're terrorizing people. That woman, she was terrified of me. Of us. Fear is a tool, Kudo said. You used to inspire hope. That was your function in peacetime. We are no longer in peacetime, Ninth. Look at the world. Kudo waved a hand. The screen shifted, showing a montage of news feeds that the Omega Protocol was passively monitoring via radio waves. Cities burning. Looters running rampant. Villains openly patrolling the streets. The Heroes Society had not just stumbled, it had been decapitated. Hope is a luxury for those who are winning, Kudo stated. We are losing. We have been losing for 100 years. This protocol, this is how we level the playing field. By becoming villains? Izuku shot back. By becoming efficient, Kudo corrected. He stepped closer to the glass, his face inches from Izuku's. Do you know why I built this box, Ninth? Do you know why the third and I wrote this code into the core of the power? Izuku glared at him, tears stinging his eyes. Because you didn't trust me. Because you thought I was weak. No, Kudo said softly. Because we knew you were good. The admission hung in the air. The third and I, we lived in the mud, Kudo explained, turning to look out at the swirling void. We killed. We tortured. We did things that make your stomach turn, just to buy one more day of freedom from All for One. We lost our souls so that one day, a boy like you could be born with his soul intact. Kudo turned back, his eyes hard. But All for One is still here. And you, your heart is too big. You hesitated against Shigaraki. You tried to save the monster while it was eating your friends. That hesitation is a fatal error. The Omega Protocol exists to remove the error. I am not an error. Izuku shouted. My feelings, my desire to save, That's what makes one for all strong. All Might said so. All Might is a man of peace, Kudo scoffed. And look where he is now. Retired. Broken. Watching the world burn. Kudo placed his hand on the glass. I am keeping you in here for your own protection, Izuku, he said, using the boy's name for the first time. Because out there in the war, kindness gets you killed. And if you die, hope dies with you. I will not let you die. Even if I have to turn you into a monster to save you. Let me out, Izuku begged, sliding down the wall. I promise I'll fight. I promise I won't hesitate. Just let me drive. Not yet, Kudo said, fading away into the mist. The probability of your survival is currently 18%. The protocol will remain engaged until probability exceeds 50%. Kudo! Izuku screamed, but the second user was gone. The screen flickered back to the external view. Omega was eating. Izuku watched in horror as his hands opened a package of stolen, dry nutrient pastes, stolen from the villain hideout. He squeezed the tasteless sludge into his mouth. He didn't chew. He just swallowed. Caloric intake 400. Hydration 60%. Resting for 20 minutes to optimize digestion. Izuku curled up on the floor of his mind, covering his head, trying to block out the sound of his own mechanical chewing. Central Hospital, Tokyo, under heavy guard. The room smelled of antiseptic and despair. Toshinori Yagi sat in a plastic chair next to a hospital bed. He looked smaller than he ever had before. His skeletal frame was hunched over, his hollow eyes staring at a stack of old, yellowed notebooks resting on his lap. In the bed, Gran Torino lay unconscious. He was hooked up to a ventilator, his chest rising and falling with a wheezing rhythm. He had survived the hole in his stomach, but only barely. I missed it, Toshinori whispered to the sleeping room. I missed it, Sorahiko. The door opened. Detective Tsukachi walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His tie was loose, his shirt stained with coffee. Any news? Toshinori asked, not looking up. Tsukachi sighed, leaning against the doorframe. We found 3 low-level villains in an alley in Kamino an hour ago. Broken bones. Concussions. They were gibbering. Toshinori's hands tightened on the notebook. Did they see him? They saw something, Tsukachi said grimly. They called it a ghost. Said it had green eyes that glowed like traffic lights. Said it asked about Shigaraki? Tsukachi walked over and placed a hand on his friend's bony shoulder. Toshinori, the reports. The brutality. They're saying he tortured them for info. That doesn't sound like Midoriya. It isn't, Toshinori said. He opened the notebook on his lap. It wasn't one of Izuku's hero analysis journals. It was older. The paper was brittle. It was a diary that had been passed down alongside the quirk, tucked away in the hidden compartment of the One for All archives that Toshinori had only recently managed to decipher. It belonged to the second user. I always wondered, Toshinori murmured, tapping the page, why the second and third users were so distant. Why their vestiges never fully spoke to me or Nana. I thought it was just the nature of the quirk. What did you find? Tsukachi asked. A failsafe, Toshinori read from the page, his voice trembling. If the vessel proves incapable of the necessary violence, if the heart is too soft to pierce the darkness, we have encoded a driver, a shadow pilot. Protocol Omega. Toshinori looked up, tears streaming down his gaunt face. They anticipated a boy like Izuku. They anticipated someone too kind to kill. So they built a switch to turn off his humanity. My God, Tsukachi breathed. Can we turn it off? I don't know, Toshinori closed the book. The notes say it's a suicide pact. It runs the body until the threat is eliminated or the body expires. It pushes the quirk to 100% constantly. Izuku's body. It can't handle that, Naomasa. He's breaking his own bones and knitting them back together with Black Whip just to keep moving. He's killing himself, Tsukachi realized. He's being used as ammunition, Toshinori corrected, anger flashing in his eyes. By the ghosts of the past. We have to find him. We have to stop him before he burns out completely. The class is organizing, Tsukachi said. Bakugo woke up this morning. He isn't taking it well. Toshinori stood up. His knees popped. He felt frail, useless. But he had to move. Take me to UA, Toshinori said. If anyone can reach the heart inside the machine, it's not me. It's them. Warehouse District 4, the harbor. Omega Deku did not sleep. Sleep was a biological necessity for restoration, but the protocol had determined that meditative stasis was more efficient. He sat perfectly still for exactly 20 minutes, lowering his heart rate to 30 beats per minute to flush lactic acid from his muscles. At minute 21, his eyes snapped open. Reboot complete. Energy levels at 68%. He stood up. He was currently inside an abandoned shipping container, sheltering from the rain. He looked down at his costume. The green fabric was stained dark brown with dried blood, some his, mostly others. The iron soles of his boots were worn down. He needed upgrades. The Sharkman's intel had pointed to a warehouse nearby. A smuggling depot for Detonarat support gear. Omega stepped out of the container. The rain had stopped, replaced by a thick fog rolling off the bay. He moved through the mist like a wraith. Danger sense was quiet, a rare mercy. That meant no malicious intent was currently directed at him. He was the hunter, not the hunted. He reached the warehouse. The roof was corrugated metal. Entry strategy, stealth. He didn't smash the door. He found a ventilation fan. He used Black Whip to silently unscrew the bolts, removed the fan, and slipped inside. The warehouse was dimly lit. Crates were stacked high. Omega dropped to the floor, silent as a spider. He scanned the labels on the crates. Detonarat. Support item, Type B gauntlets. Medical supplies, biogel. Target acquired. He ripped open a crate of medical supplies. He took the biogel, a military-grade healing salve used by villains. He stripped off his torn gloves. His hands were a mess. The skin was purple and black, the fingers swollen. He had used 100% smashes repeatedly. The bones were microfractured in a dozen places. Omega applied the gel. It stung, a sharp chemical burn. Inside the mindscape, Izuka hissed. Ow! That burns! Omega ignored the phantom sensation. He wrapped his hands in fresh bandages found in the crate. Then, he opened the support gear crate. He found a pair of gauntlets. They were bulky, ugly things, black metal with red piping. They weren't designed for his style, but they offered compression and shock absorption. He strapped them on. They hummed as they synced with his bioelectricity. Integration successful. Impact output increased by 15%. He was about to leave when a noise stopped him. A whimpering sound. Omega froze. He rotated his head. The sound was coming from a small office cubicle in the corner of the warehouse. He approached, his footsteps silent. Inside the office, huddled under a desk, was a child. Maybe 6 years old. Wearing dirty pajamas. The boy was clutching a stuffed All Might doll that was missing an arm. Omega stared at the child. The child stared back, eyes wide with terror. Please, the boy whispered. Don't hurt me. Omega's HUD flashed. Subject, civilian child. Threat 0. Status, malnourished. High stress. Directive, ignore. Omega turned to leave. Wait! The boy cried. Omega stopped. Conflict. Leaving a civilian in a hostile zone reduces probability of civilian survival. Secondary directive. Legacy save those who ask for help. The protocol glitched. The rigorous code of the second user clashed with the fundamental core of One for All, the desire to save. Omega turned back. He looked at the child. You are in a restricted zone, Omega said. His voice was still the scary, dual-layered robotic tone. The boy flinched. My mommy, the villains took her. They left me here. Omega processed this. Villains have been neutralized in Sector 3. Police response time is undefined. Omega reached into his utility belt. He pulled out a nutrient bar, one of the ones he had stolen earlier. He tossed it to the boy. The boy caught it, staring at it. Eat. Caloric density is sufficient for 12 hours. Omega walked over to the desk. He grabbed a marker and a piece of paper. He wrote a series of numbers, coordinates. Go to this location. 2 miles north. There is a shelter operated by the hero agency the Pussycats. Do not stop. Do not talk to strangers. Will you take me? The boy asked. tears in his eyes. You look like Deku. But scary. Omega stared at the boy. Inside the mindscape, Izuku was pressing his face against the glass. Take him. We have to take him. We can't leave him alone. Transporting civilian creates drag, Kudo argued. It slows velocity. It reveals position. He's a kid, Izuku yelled. If we leave him, we're no better than AFO, the protocol word. Negative, Omega said to the boy. I am on a mission. You must walk. The boy started to cry. Omega stood there. The logic circuits fought the emotional memory. Suddenly, Omega moved. He grabbed a heavy tarp from a nearby crate. He wrapped it around the boy like a poncho. Stay in the shadows, Omega commanded. If you see anyone, hide. Move now. The boy nodded, terrified, and ran out the back door. Omega watched him go. Probability of child survival, 45%. Acceptable variance. Omega turned back to the crates. He loaded a backpack with medical supplies and batteries. As he adjusted the straps, a sound came from the radio on the desk. It had been left on, tuned to a pirate frequency used by the underground. Reports of a green demon in the harbor district. A frantic voice crackled. It's him. The green ghost. He's hunting us. Who cares? Another voice replied, deeper, distorted. Let him come. The doctor has a surprise for him. Tell the Vanguard to prep the high-end at coordinates 34.5 by 139. We'll see how the ghost likes the meat grinder. Omega froze. Coordinates 34.5 by 139. The HUD overlaid a map of the city. Location, abandoned industrial zone, Mustafa. Intel, high-end Noma presence confirmed. Objective, seek and destroy. Omega grabbed the radio and crushed it in his hand. New directive, the voice growled. Hunt. The following morning, Yue High School, the fortress. The sun rose over the fortified walls of Yue, but it brought no warmth. The school had been converted into an evacuation shelter. Civilians camped on the lawns. The security robots patrolled the perimeter. In the common room of the Heights Alliance dorms, Class 1A was gathered. They weren't wearing their school uniforms. They were wearing their hero costumes. Bakugo sat on the couch. He was heavily bandaged. His chest was wrapped in gauze where the rivet stab had pierced him. He looked pale, but his eyes were burning with a ferocious, quiet intensity that was scarier than his usual yelling. Uraraka stood by the window, looking out. Her eyes were puffy. Ida was polishing his armor, his movements jerky and angry. Todoroki sat on the floor, staring at a map spread out on the coffee table. We have a lead, Todoroki said quietly. Police scanners picked up chatter about a disturbance at the harbor last night. And 3 villains in Kamino with broken bones. It's him, Bakugo said. His voice was a low growl. He's moving fast, Yaoyorozu added, pointing to the map. He's hitting villain supply lines. He's gathering resources. He's preparing for a war. He's alone, Uraraka whispered. He's all alone out there. Cold. Hungry. He's not alone, Bakugo spat. He's got that thing in his head. That thing that looked at us like we were garbage. It's a quirk malfunction, Ida said, trying to be rational. The stress of the war caused a dissociative break. We need to bring him in. We need to restrain him. Restrain him? Kaminari asked nervously. Dude, did you see him? He kicked a hole in the sky. How do we restrain that? We don't hold back, Bakugo said. He stood up, wincing at the pain in his chest. We hit him with everything we've got. We break his legs if we have to. We knock him unconscious and we drag his ass back here, Bakugo. Kirishima warned. Shut up. Bakugo slammed his hand on the table. You didn't see his eyes. That wasn't Deku. That was a machine. If we don't stop him, he's going to get himself killed. He's going to throw himself at Shigaraki until there's nothing left but a stain on the pavement. Bakugo looked at the class. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage and terrified concern. I took a hit meant for him, Bakugo whispered. I didn't do it so he could turn into a suicide bomber. We go get him. Today, the door opened. All Might stood there, leaning on a cane. Sakachi was behind him. Young Bakugo is right, All Might said, his voice grim. We have located a pattern. He is triangulating AFO's position. Based on his trajectory, he is heading for the industrial zone. All Might looked at his students, his children. This is not a rescue mission, All Might said. This is an extraction. You are facing the full power of One for All, unchecked by human hesitation. He will not recognize you as friends. He will calculate you as obstacles. We know, Uraraka said, clenching her fists. She floated slightly off the ground, her face set in stone. But we're bringing him home. Suit up, Bakugo commanded, walking toward the door. The nerd is grounded. Cliffhanger scene. High above the industrial zone, perched on the rusted skeleton of a crane, Omega Deku watched the sun rise. The wind whipped his tattered cape. His HUD was running millions of simulations a second. Target location below. Enemy count, 15 Nomu signatures. Probability of victory, 65%. But then, a new signal appeared on his radar. Not a villain. Not a Nomu. Multiple signals. Approaching from the west. Signature match. Explosion. Zero gravity. Engine. Half cold, half hot. Creation. Omega stood up. Inside the box, Izuka gasped. They're coming. Kaken. Uraraka, they're coming. They are interfering, Kudo said coldly. Omega Deku looked at the approaching dust clouds of his friends. The green eyes flared brighter. Obstacles detected, the dual voice spoke to the wind. Engaging non-lethal countermeasures. He stepped off the crane, plummeting toward the earth to begin the war. The industrial zone of Dagoba District was a graveyard of the industrial era. It was a sprawling labyrinth of rusted skeletons, massive cranes that bowed like dying giants, hollowed-out factories with shattered skylights, and mountains of scrap metal that groaned under the shifting weight of the wind. The air here tasted of iron oxide and stagnant water, a metallic tang that coated the back of the throat. A thick, unnatural fog had rolled in off the coast, clinging to the ground like a suffocating blanket. It muffled sound and obscured vision, turning the maze of steel into a ghostly white void. 19 students of UA High's Class 1A moved through the fog. They didn't move like students anymore. They moved like a paramilitary unit. Katsuki Bakugo took point. His hero costume was patched, the orange X across his chest fresh and vibrant against the dull black. But underneath, his body was a map of taped ribs and stitched flesh. He walked with a slight limp that he was trying furiously to hide, his gauntlets clicking softly as he flexed his hands, keeping the nitroglycerin sweat circulating. Keep the spacing, Bakugo growled into his comms, his voice low and jagged. 5-meter intervals. Momo, Jiro, keep the sensors active. If he's here, he knows we're here. I'm trying, Jiro whispered back, her earphone jacks plugged into the rusted wall of a warehouse. But there's interference. A low-frequency hum. It's vibrating through the whole district. It's masking everything. It's him, Todoroki said, walking on Bakugo's left. His breath fogged in the cold air. He's overclocking One for All. The energy discharge is creating static. He's acting like a beacon, Ida added from the rear guard, his engines idling with a soft purr. Or a lure. Cut the chatter, Bakugo snapped. We know what this is. It's an extraction. We find him, we surround him, we subdue him. No hesitation. If you blink, he'll break your bones. If you try to talk to him, he'll knock you out. Treat him like a villain until he's in cuffs. He's not a villain, Bakugo. Uraraka's voice was trembling, though she tried to keep it steady. She was floating slightly above the group to avoid making noise on the gravel. He's Deku. He's just lost. The thing piloting his body isn't Deku, Bakugo retorted, his red eyes scanning the scaffolding above. It's a computer program written by dead men. And right now, its programming is to survive. We are the threat. High above them, perched on a steel girder 60 meters in the air, the Omega Protocol watched them. The entity that had once been Izuka Midoriya was perfectly still. The rain from the previous night had washed away some of the blood on his costume, but the fabric was stained a deep, brownish red. His cowl was pulled up, the metal mouth guard locked in place. His eyes were glowing searchlights in the mist, piercing through the fog with thermal imaging provided by the third user's FA gene sensory application. Scan complete. Hostile count, 19. Threat level moderate. Primary targets: high danger Katsuki Bakugo, Shoto Todoroki, Fumikage Tokoemi, in low light conditions. Secondary targets: support/mobility Tenya Ida, Momo Yayorozu, Kyoka Jiro. Tactical assessment: group formation is tight. Overlapping fields of fire. Inside the vestige world, Izuku was pressing his hands against the glass wall of his prison. Don't, he begged. Kudo, please. They're my friends. They came for me. Just let me talk to them. The second user stood with his arms crossed, watching the screen. Talking wastes time. Time allows all for one to relocate. These friends are an anchor dragging you down. They cannot keep up with the pace of the war, so we just hurt them? Izuku cried. Is that the plan? We neutralize them, Kudo corrected. Efficiently? Painlessly if possible. But we remove them from the board so the carrier can proceed. Kudo looked at the screen, his eyes narrowing. Initiate first strike. Blind them. In the real world, Omega Deku tilted his head. Smoke screen, maximum output. Down on the ground, the fog suddenly changed color. From the shadows of the towering cranes, a purple smoke erupted, billowing out with explosive force. It mixed with the white fog, creating a dense, impenetrable wall of violet smog that reduced visibility to zero. Gas! Momo shouted, creating gas masks from her arm instantly. Everyone, masks on! It's not poison! Bakugo yelled, blasting an explosion into the air to clear the smoke. It's the sixth user's quirk. He's blinding us. Zip! A sound like a whip cracking broke the air. Shoji! Jiro screamed. Mizo Shoji, the multi-armed scout, was yanked upward into the smog. He didn't even have time to cry out. A black tendril had descended from the darkness, wrapped around his torso, and pulled him into the sky. Shoji! Tokoemi unleashed Dark Shadow. Get him back! Dark Shadow roared and surged upward into the purple haze. There was a flash of green light. A dull thud. Then, Dark Shadow shrieked and retracted, cowering back into Tokoemi's cloak. He's too bright. Dark Shadow whimpered. He burns. Shoji's body fell from the sky, landing on a pile of sandbags nearby. He was unconscious, but alive. His arms were tied intricately with black whip, rendering him immobile. He took out our eyes, Todoroki realized, igniting his left side to burn away the fog. He knows our formations. Circle up. Ida commanded. Back to back. Defend the center. The class tightened their circle. Momo was in the middle, creating a cannon. Kaminari was charging up. Silence descended again. Then the voice spoke. It didn't come from one direction. It echoed off the metal walls, amplified by the acoustics of the scrapyard. It was the voice of a nightmare, Izuku's cadence, stripped of all warmth, overlaid with a metallic harmonic. Warning. You are interfering with a Class S strategic operation. Midoriya! Ida shouted, chopping the air. Please! Listen to us. We are here to help you. You are injured. You need medical attention. Medical attention is unnecessary. Self-repair protocols are active. Physical trauma is within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters? Uraraka stepped forward, her mask obscuring her face, but her voice thick with tears. Deku, you're hurting yourself. You're hurting everyone. Come back to us. Return is impossible, the voice droned. The vessel Izuku Midoriya is currently archived. I am the Omega Protocol. You are obstacles. Disperse immediately, or I will be forced to dismantle you. Dismantle us? Bakugo let out a sharp, angry laugh. Sparks flew from his palms. You think you can take all of us, you glorified calculator? Come down here and try it. The purple smoke swirled. Accepted. He didn't drop from the sky. He exploded from the ground. Omega had used the distraction of the voice to tunnel beneath them using a combination of FA gene and brute strength. He erupted in the center of the formation, right next to Yayorozu. Momo! Todoroki screamed. Omega didn't attack Momo. He touched her cannon. Structural integrity, compromised. He flicked his finger. A 20% air blast shattered the cannon instantly. Before Momo could react, he swept her legs. She hit the ground hard. He didn't strike her. he simply placed a precise chop to the vagus nerve in her neck. Her eyes rolled back. She slumped. Threat creation. Neutralized. You bastard! Kaminari unleashed his indiscriminate shock. 1.3 million volts. Omega didn't dodge. He grabbed Kaminari's wrist. Electricity absorption incomplete. However, grounding is simple. Omega drove Kaminari's hand into the wet earth. The electricity discharged harmlessly into the ground. Omega delivered a knee to Kaminari's gut, controlled, precise, just enough to knock the wind out of him for 10 minutes. Kaminari folded. Chaos erupted. Get him! Kirishima hardened, rushing in with Sato. The two powerhouses swung massive haymakers. Omega weaved between them. He moved like water. He didn't block, he redirected. He grabbed Kirishima's hardened arm and used it to block Sato's punch. The impact cracked Kirishima's hardening duration limited by stamina. Sugar rush results in cognitive decline. Omega grabbed the back of their heads and slammed them together. The sound of rock hitting rock echoed. Both boys dropped. In 10 seconds he had taken out 4 students. Spread out. Bakugo roared, launching himself at Omega. Don't let him cluster us. Bakugo unleashed a howitzer impact point blank. The explosion was blinding, but when the smoke cleared, Omega was gone. He was standing on top of a shipping container, looking down at them. His green eyes pulsed. Analysis. Emotional volatility increasing. Coordination breaking down. Probability of victory, 98%. Shut up. Ciro launched his tape, trying to bind him. Omega caught the tape, wrapped it around his arm, and yanked. Ciro went flying, crashing into the container. It was a systematic deconstruction. Ojiro tried to engage in close combat. Omega analyzed his tail movements, and countered every strike before it was thrown. Mina tried to melt the ground to trap him. Omega used float to hover inches above the acid, kicking her into a pile of tires. Aoyama fired his laser. Omega deflected it with a flick of his glove, sending the beam into a water tower, which collapsed and flooded the area, washing away Mineta's sticky balls. It wasn't a fight. It was a lesson in the difference between a hero student and a weapon of war. The vestige world. Izuku was sobbing. He sat with his back to the screen, hands over his ears. He couldn't watch anymore. He had seen himself knock out Momo. He had felt the impact of slamming Kirishima and Sato together. Why aren't they fighting back harder? Izuku wept. Why are they so weak? They aren't weak, the third user said, appearing beside the glass box. They are hesitating. They don't want to hurt you. But you, the protocol, it has no such reservations. They're going to hate me, Izuku whispered. When this is over, if I ever get out, they'll never look at me the same way. Perhaps, Kudo said, walking into view. But they will be alive to hate you. That is the trade-off. Kudo looked at the screen. The heavy hitters are left. Todoroki. Ida. Bakugo. Tokoemi. The protocol is about to escalate. The industrial zone.